Hello, Pink Collective, and welcome to Pink After Dark. Tonight's tales blur the line between true and fictional, so get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let's begin. Evermother, Heartloom, Episode 7, Tag, You're Out. The 1965 facility guide described the Carousel District as a circular space. I had read the description 8 times across our previous visits. I had it memorized the way you memorize something you intend to use, practically, with precision. A vast circular space with a domed ceiling painted to resemble a night sky, housing full-size carousels arranged around a central promenade. A jewel of light and music, where every child discovers the particular joy of circular motion. 4 carousels. A central promenade, circular, legible. A geometry you could hold in your head and navigate by. I am telling you this so that you understand what we expected to find when we began to move. The district had 4 carousels, that part was accurate, everything else was not. The carousels were not arranged around a central point. They were distributed, placed at intervals across a space that kept revealing new dimensions the further into it we traveled, between them, and extending well beyond them. The district had accumulated 6 decades of interior geography. Concession stalls with their shutters rusted permanently down, decorative iron archways spanning passages that had not been passages in the original design. Low dividing walls of painted wood that had warped and split in the geothermal humidity but not fallen, defunct attraction booths with their service counters still set. Faded fabric curtains hanging from ceiling-mounted tracks that subdivided the space into chambers without closing them off completely. Each chamber connected to 2 or 3 others through different openings. None of the openings were the same size. The dome was visible from everywhere, which should have helped. It didn't. Darius pointed his camera upward in the second chamber and tried to use the constellations as a compass. The gold leaf stars had been reworked, added to, removed, repositioned, over and over, across 60 years of whatever passes for restlessness in a thing that cannot sleep. The sky above us corresponded to no astronomical map any of us could place. Darius tried from 3 positions. He got 3 answers. He stopped trying and the camera came back down, and we moved forward because forward was the only direction we had. Mina was mapping. She had her notebook out from the first minute, drawing the entrance, the first carousel, the archway to the second chamber, the passage to the third. She kept drawing as we moved. In the 4th chamber, she stopped and looked at what she had produced, and then showed it to me without saying anything. The map was wrong. Not wrong in any specific place she could point to, technically coherent, each junction connecting to what followed it, each dimension approximately rendered. Wrong the way a dream is wrong. You cannot fault the individual parts and yet the whole cannot be real. She tried to fold the notebook so that the chambers aligned with each other and the geometry resolved. It did not resolve. She put the notebook in her kit. She did not get it out again. The carousel lights were the only illumination and they moved. Constantly, slowly, the amber and rose and gold of each canopy sweeping across the chamber walls in rotation, which meant the shadows also moved, everything in the district in slow, constant lateral motion. Standing still felt like moving. Moving felt like standing still. After 10 minutes inside, I could no longer reliably identify which direction we had entered from. None of us could. We did not say this aloud because saying it aloud would have made it the primary fact, and we could not afford for it to be the primary fact at that time. The song was everywhere, from every speaker in the district simultaneously, mounted beneath the dome at intervals, small and dark and numerous, visible only when the carousel lights swept across them and revealed their housings. The melody came from all of them at once, which meant it came from every direction at once, which meant it provided no positional information at all. You could not locate Madam Lullabelle by listening. The song was everywhere she was and everywhere she was not, which was functionally identical to nowhere. This was deliberate. I understood that even then. The song existed to fill the space so completely that sound became useless as a navigational tool. It was the district's first defense, and it was not a defense that required Madam Lullabelle to do anything at all. We were in the 3rd chamber, 4 carousels visible from where we stood. The amber light of the nearest making everything the color of very old photographs, when Darius stopped moving and said very quietly, "Don't move." On the carousel to our left, one of the horses was occupied. Madam Lullabelle was seated on it, side saddle, with a particular composed stillness of something that had been in exactly that position for a very long time, and was in no hurry to change it. Her cracked porcelain face was tilted in the posture I had read about in the session files and had been trying to prepare myself for all evening, head slightly inclined, wide eyes fixed at a middle distance, mouth just open, the expression of someone listening to music only she can hear, and finding it almost unbearable, and finding that bearable. Her mechanical hands rested in her lap. The rose-pink light of the carousel canopy caught the hairline crack that ran from her left eye to the corner of her jaw, and in the crack was the dried residue of dark fluid, old, set, carried a long time. She was singing, the same melody, patient, exact. She was not looking at us. We stood very still. The carousel completed its rotation slowly, the horses rising and falling on their poles in that particular rhythm, the lights shifting as the canopy turned. And she came around to face us fully for one moment, and then continued around, and was gone behind the column of horses, and we waited for her to reappear on the next circuit. The horse completed its circuit. It was empty. She had not passed us. She had not moved through the chamber. She was simply no longer on the carousel, and the song continued from every speaker simultaneously, and there was no way to know where she was. "We keep moving," Sophie said after a moment. We kept moving. We were in the third chamber when we understood that the song had never been background. It had felt like background, omnidirectional, sourceless, filling the space the way building noise fills a room until you stop hearing it as a thing and start hearing it as the absence of silence. We had been treating it as atmosphere. We had been wrong about that. The first sign was Darius. He was moving along the left wall of the third chamber, camera raised, documenting the construction of an iron archway when he stopped. Not the deliberate stop of someone who has found something, the involuntary stop of someone who has felt something. He turned slowly and pointed his camera at the dark directly behind him. On the camera's night vision screen, at the boundary where the amber carousel light failed and the dark of the wall began, a shape was visible. Not moving, not advancing, simply present, standing at the precise edge of the light, in the space between lit and unlit, where the carousel's rotation brought a sweep of amber close but did not quite reach. The shape was the height of a small woman. The shape had its head tilted. By the time we had all turned to look, it was not there. The song continued, the same melody, patient, exact. "Did you see that?" Mina said. "Yes," Sophie said. We moved toward the center of the chamber, toward the nearest carousel and the lit perimeter of its base. The amber light there was consistent, not the sweeping illumination of the canopy, which moved, but the fixed glow of the base mechanism which did not. We gathered in it. Sophie had her torch pointed at the wall where the shape had been. The wall was empty, the dark was empty, or appeared empty, which was no longer the same thing. "She didn't follow us into the light," Darius said. He was still watching the camera screen. "No," Sophie said, "she didn't." We stayed in the lit perimeter for a full minute, not speaking, watching the dark at the chamber's edges. Nothing appeared. The melody continued its circuit, its patient omnidirectionality, offering no information about where she was or wasn't. After the minute passed, Sophie said we needed to keep moving. We moved, staying as close to the carousel bases as the chamber's geography allowed. She appeared again in the passage between the third and fourth chambers. The passage was narrow and the carousel light did not reach it fully. The amber glow of the third chamber behind us, the chamber ahead not yet visible, a stretch of transitional dark that we crossed quickly with our torches. We crossed it in file. Darius, Sophie, Mina, me, Caleb. I was halfway through when Caleb said, very quietly and very carefully, "Elena, don't stop walking." "She's directly behind me," he said. 2 feet, maybe less. I wanted to turn. I could feel the chill creep up my spine. I did not turn. I kept walking, counting each steps, just for the distraction from what was stalking behind. Sophie, ahead of me, had already understood something from the quality of Caleb's voice and had her torch pointed back down the passage over my shoulder. The beam caught Madam Lullabelle at the outer edge of its range, not advancing, not retreating, standing in the passage with her head at the listening angle and her mechanical hands at her sides and her wide glass eyes oriented, precisely and without ambiguity, at the back of Caleb's neck. She was not moving. She was simply close. Caleb stepped into the fourth chamber's carousel light and she did not follow. She remained at the passage boundary, at the exact point where the amber glow of the fourth chamber's nearest carousel began, and stood there for a moment that was longer than it needed to be, and then was not there. No sound of withdrawal, no footstep, no mechanism, no disturbance of the air that the torch beam could catch. Simply present, and then not. "She's testing the light," Mina said. She was shaking slightly. She did not mention it, and neither did anyone else. "She's testing where it ends." We understood then what the darkness of the district was for. Not concealment in the ordinary sense, not hiding. The dark was her medium, the way water is a fish's medium. She moved through it without friction, without sound, without the intermediate steps that would allow you to track her passage from one point to another. She moved through the dark with the ease of something that had been doing it for 60 years. In the fourth chamber, I found the first one, at the base of a carousel pole, and I almost stepped on it. Small, perhaps 30 centimeters tall, porcelain with a painted face in the style of a music hall figurine, rosy cheeks, a fixed small smile, eyes that were slightly too symmetrical to read as natural. Its dress was painted rather than sewn, the same technique as Madam Lullabelle's chassis, the same faded palette. Its mouth was open. I stood very still and looked at it, and after a few seconds I understood what I was noticing. It was vibrating. A fine, continuous tremor running through the whole figure from base to crown, the physical expression of a sound it was generating at a frequency just below what I could hear. I could feel it in my back teeth. I could feel it in the floor through the soles of my shoes. Mina crouched beside it. She did not touch it. "It's a resonator," she said. "It's generating the harmonic foundation, the bass register." She looked up at me. Madam Lullabelle's voice is the top of the chord. These are the bottom. We found a second one on top of an archway, a third on the sill of a defunct booth window facing inward. A fourth and fifth on the floor of the passage between the fourth and fifth chambers, standing very close together, facing each other, as though they had been in the middle of something when we arrived. A cluster of 7 in the 6th chamber, arranged in a semicircle around the base of the nearest carousel, vibrating in perfect, terrible unison. They were everywhere, every surface, every lit area, every lit perimeter, every base and sill and archway. They were the furniture of the district, and they had been in position long before we arrived. We had been walking through a concert that was already in progress. We were not audience, we were the intrusion. The lit areas belonged to the figures. The dark between them, the boundaries, the passages, the edges of carousel light, where amber faded to nothing, those were empty of figures. Those were where Madam Lullabelle appeared. The song changed. It happened between one breath and the next, the melody continuing its patient circuit, and then, without announcement, without transition, a voice threading itself into the existing structure the way a second color threads into water. Words, not the wordless precision of the bass melody that we had spent the last hour learning to read. Words, in the same high exact register, in the same slightly off scale, delivered with the particular measured rhythm of something that has been sung to children. The meaning did not register immediately. The voice was too precise, the acoustics too distributed, the sound arriving from every speaker simultaneously, so that each word dissolved into the room before the next arrived. I heard syllables. I heard pattern. I heard something that rhymed. It took perhaps 3 full repetitions before the words assembled themselves in my comprehension into what they actually were.
Come and play in the dark with me. The light's not fair, you all agree. Step outside where the lanterns end. Tag your out, little friend.
The first time I understood it, I thought I had misheard it. The second time I was certain I hadn't.
Run and hide in the amber glow, but
Sophie said nothing. She moved us into the nearest carousel's lit perimeter without discussion, and we stood in the amber glow of the base mechanism with our torches pointed outward. And the song continued its circuit from every speaker simultaneously, and the meaning of it filled the chamber the way the vibration of the porcelain figures filled it, not with volume, but with presence.
One step past the golden ring, hear the dark star whispering. Touch your shoulder, touch your hand. Welcome to my fairground land. Little friend.
The hunting began in earnest. She came out of the dark behind the curtained archway at the far end of the chamber without warning, not emerging from it, simply existing on our side of it, between the curtain and the nearest carousel, in the space that had been empty when we last looked. She was not oriented at the group. She was standing with her head at the listening angle, facing a point approximately 2 meters to Sophie's left, and the song came from everywhere simultaneously, and it was impossible to know whether the voice was hers or the speaker's or some combination that had stopped being distinguishable. Sophie moved the group right without looking at Madam Lullabelle. Fast, deliberate, into the lit corridor between the 5th and 6th chambers nearest carousels. We followed. Madam Lullabelle did not follow. In the edge of my torchlight, at the threshold of the corridor's amber reach, she stopped.
For don't you like the merry-go-round? Don't you like the carousel sound? Stay and play till the music bends. Tag, you're out, little friend.
In the 6th chamber, she was already there. Not at the boundary. In the middle of the passage between the 6th chamber's 2 internal archways, the passage we needed to cross to reach the 7th chamber, the only route through that we could find. She was standing in it with her back to us, facing away, and the asymmetry of her left arm was visible even at distance, that slight delay in its correspondence to the rest of her, the half-second lag that made every small motion of hers wrong in a specific and stomach-turning way. We waited in the lit perimeter of the 6th chamber's nearest carousel. The song continued. The porcelain figures at the carousel's base vibrated their harmonic foundation. Madam Lullabelle stood in the passage and did not move. Caleb, behind me, said very quietly, "She's in the dark part of the passage. The 7th chamber's carousel light reaches the far end of it. If we go in fast enough—" "She's faster than us," Darius said, flat, not argumentative, stating what the camera had shown him. "The passage is 12 feet, Caleb said. She's at the middle of it. We'd only need to cover 6. Sophie was watching Madam Lullabelle. Not the passage, not the route, Madam Lullabelle specifically. She had been watching her for approximately 40 seconds, which I knew because I had been watching Sophie watch her, and I was counting. "There's something," Sophie said. She said it the way you say something when you're not yet certain enough of it to commit. The song. There's something happening to it, periodically. Nobody spoke.
Come and play in the dark with me. The light's not fair, you all agree.
The song stretched. It was subtle enough that I might have attributed it to my own auditory system, to fatigue, to the acoustic properties of the chamber, to any of the explanations that felt less significant than the correct one. The phrase you all agree elongated, the vowels pulling slightly, the consonants losing their precision, as though the track carrying the sound had briefly slowed, a damaged record dragging on its spindle before recovering. 1 second, perhaps less. The melody resumed its exact tempo, as though nothing had happened. In the passage, Madame Lullabelle froze. I did not understand what I was seeing immediately, because I had no framework for it yet. I saw her stop, every part of her simultaneously, the way a recording stops, and the passage was suddenly and completely empty of her menace. And then the melody snapped back to its correct tempo, and she was moving again, and I had lost her in the dark before I understood that the 2 events were the same event. "Did you see that?" I stated. "Yes," Mina said. She was looking at the ceiling, at the near speaker housing, with the focused expression of someone who has just received a piece of information they need to sit with before they can use it. "Don't move. I need to hear it again. Step outside where the lanterns end. Tag, you're out, little friend." She appeared at the left boundary of the 6th chamber without transition, between a porcelain figure and the curtain of the nearest archway, in a space that she had not been in a moment before. Her head was at the listening angle. Her glass eyes were oriented at Mina. Mina did not see her. Mina was still listening to the ceiling speaker, her head tilted, her expression inward. Darius saw her. "Mina," he said, in a register that was not a warning and not nothing. Mina moved left into the carousel's lit perimeter without looking up, and Madam Lullabelle did not follow her into the light. She remained at the boundary, in the space between the porcelain figure and the curtain, in the dark, and the song from the speaker above her continued its circuit, and her mouth was open, and her eyes were wide, and her head was tilted, and she was, in every external observable detail, listening.
One step past the golden ring, hear the dark star whispering.
The song stretched again. Longer this time, the phrase start whispering, pulling out of its tempo, the sibilants elongating, the melody going soft and underwater, the way a tape recording goes when the mechanism falters. 1.5 seconds. 2. The amber lights of the carousels dimmed fractionally in the same instant, as though drawing from the same source. Madam Lullabelle froze. This time I was watching for it, and I saw it clearly, the complete and instantaneous cessation of every part of her, mid-motion, with no intermediate slowing. She had been turning her head toward the space Sophie occupied. She stopped with the head 3/4 of the way through the turn, and she was as still as the porcelain figures at the carousel base, and the song was underwater, and the lights were slightly wrong, and for 2 full seconds the chamber was nothing but amber and dark and 5 people breathing. The melody snapped back. She continued the head turn, completing it, arriving at Sophie's position with her eyes, and finding Sophie had moved. "There," Mina said. She said it quietly and with finality, the way you say a word when you have been holding it for some time and are now ready to use it. When the song degrades, when it stretches like the record is slipping, she stops, completely. It's a system event, the same process generates both. "How long?" Sophie asked. 2 seconds, maybe 3, not consistent. "Can we predict it?" "Not yet." Mina looked at the speaker housing above us. "I think it's getting worse." We tried to cross the passage to the 7th chamber on the next stretch and freeze. Mina watched the ceiling and gave us the signal. A flat open hand dropped and we went. It worked. We were through the passage and into the 7th chamber's carousel light before the melody recovered. Madam Lullabelle was not in the 7th chamber when we arrived, and we stood in the amber glow of the nearest carousel's base and breathed.
Come and play in the dark with me.
The song filled the 7th chamber from every speaker. The porcelain figures at the carousel's base vibrated their chord beneath it. Somewhere in the passages behind us and around us, in the dark between the lit perimeters of a district that was much larger than the facility guide had described, Madam Lullabelle moved along her routes. We were in the light. We stayed in the light. And Mina watched the ceiling speaker with her notebook open and her pen moving, writing down the intervals, looking for the pattern that would tell us how to use what she had found, because the passage to the 8th chamber was ahead of us, and staying in the light was not the same as being safe, and we all knew it. "The intervals are too unpredictable," she said. "Best will be just to keep moving forward and try and utilize the freezing within the moment." We were moving between the 7th and 8th chambers. The passage between them was one of the district's darker transitions, the carousel of the 7th chamber behind us, the carousel of the 8th chamber not yet visible ahead, a stretch of near dark navigated by torchlight and the ambient glow of the dome above. I was counting. I have always counted in the facility, heads, doorways, directions, intervals. It was the only mapping system still available to me after Mina's notebook failed. I counted Darius, Sophie, Mina, ahead of me. I counted myself. I turned to count Caleb.
Tag, you're out, little friend.
A small porcelain hand came down and gently grabbed Caleb's shoulder. There was a sound, a single syllable, or what my mind registered as the beginning of a syllable, the intake of breath that precedes a word, the shape of a sound that never completed itself. My mind filed it as Caleb, the way you file the sounds of people you know without consciously hearing them, and because it filed it as Caleb rather than as a warning, it did not trigger the response it should have triggered. Caleb was ripped backwards into the darkness, at a speed I could barely register. I turned fully. The passage behind me was empty. not obscured, not dark beyond the torchlight's range. I could see the arch of the seventh chamber behind me clearly, the amber carousel light still moving beyond it. The passage was empty. Caleb was not in it. He was not in the seventh chamber. He was not anywhere the torchlight reached. I said his name. Darius had the camera up before I finished saying it. He swept the night vision to the left wall of the passage, not the floor, the left wall. Low and at the very edge of what the camera could resolve was a blur of lateral motion, something moving fast along the wall, close to the ground, into the archway on the left side of the passage that I had not registered as an archway because the curtain across it had made it read as wall. It was through the arch and gone before the camera could track it, carrying a weight it accommodated without slowing, and the weight did not struggle, or if it struggled, the struggle was already over. The melody shifted, 3 beats, a repeated phrase just slightly under pitch, not the mechanical exactness of the bass melody, insistent in the way of something repeating itself because it has lost access to what comes next. I tried to find a word for what the phrase sounded like. The closest I could get was a question asked by something that has forgotten what an answer is. Sophie turned. She looked at the empty passage for one moment, and then she looked at me, and her expression was the most frightening thing I had seen since we entered the district, because it was not panic and it was not grief. It was the face of someone making a decision before they have finished processing what has happened, because processing must wait. "We go after him," she said. Nobody argued. The 8th and 9th chambers were the deepest we had entered. Madam Lullabelle's appearances increased. She was on the carousels, sitting, standing, moving between the horses with a sideways walk that the horses' poles should have prevented and did not. She moved between the carousels, then in the archways, at the tops of the dividing walls, in the dark booths, behind the curtains in the passages. She was never in the same place, and sightings of her came closer together. The frieze window shortened, the pattern was shifting, the melody deteriorating faster, as though the district itself was being pushed beyond what it could sustain. The porcelain figures had redistributed. They were no longer only in the lit areas. Some of them were in the passages now, standing in the torchlight, vibrating. We moved around them carefully. Nobody touched them. I don't fully understand why this felt so important, but I know that all 4 of us felt it independently without discussing it. There was something about the figures that made contact feel inadvisable in a way that went beyond the rational. We called Caleb's name at intervals. We called it the way you call into a space you're not sure carries sound correctly, with enough volume to be heard and enough restraint not to be heard by everything. No answer came back. What came back was the melody, redirected, adjusted, the district absorbing the sound of his name into its acoustic fabric and returning it altered. Darius kept filming. I watched him do it, the camera steady, the eye to the viewfinder, the deliberate frame of every image, and understood that for him, this was the same thing Sophie's clear decision-making was for her, and what Rosa's separation principle was for me. The camera was the distance between what was happening and what he was feeling about it. He was not going to put it down. Sophie moved at the front of our reduced group with her torch pointing ahead, and her decisions arriving slightly before the rest of us reached the same conclusions. She said very little. What she said was directional, left here, through the curtain, stay close, and it was enough. In the 9th chamber I found Caleb's torch. It was on the floor, still on. The beam pointed at the right-hand wall. On the wall, drawn in the dust with one finger, was an arrow. Caleb's handwriting, even reduced to a single mark in settled dust, was recognizable to me. I had been reading his research notes for months, had learned the particular pressure he applied, the angle of his strokes. The arrow pointed to the passage on the far side of the 9th chamber. He had been here, conscious, moving under enough of his own agency to stop and make a mark, in a chamber we had not yet reached, further into the district than any of us had been. He had found a surface and left us a direction. Sophie crouched beside the torch and picked it up. She held it for a moment with both hands. Then she passed it to Mina without comment. Mina put it in her kit. We followed the arrow. The 10th chamber was the largest we had entered. The ceiling here was closer to the dome than anywhere else in the district, the painted constellations more visible, the gold leaf catching the carousel light with unusual clarity. the stars rendering the shapes of things that were almost familiar and not quite. 4 carousels running simultaneously, each at a different speed, their combined lights producing a cross-cutting of amber and rose and gold that made everything in the chamber seem to flicker at irregular intervals. The porcelain figures were on every surface, every base, every archway, every sill, every stretch of floor not occupied by carousel infrastructure. The combined vibration of them in a chamber this size was something you felt in your chest rather than heard. I saw the first Madam Lullabelle on Carousel 1, seated between 2 horses, facing the direction of our approach. I saw the second Madam Lullabelle on the canopy platform of Carousel 2, standing with her mechanical hands at her sides, looking toward the dome. I saw the third Madam Lullabelle at the base of a pole on Carousel 3, crouching, with her head tilted at the listening angle and her wide eyes fixed at a point on the floor. 3 of her, the same cracked face, the same rust at the shoulder seams, the same dried dark fluid in the same crack from the same eye to the same jaw. 3 of them, in 3 locations, in a chamber with 4 carousels and no explanation I could reach for. None of them bothered by the light, giving the sinking realization that avoiding the light was only a game, and that game was now over. All 3 were singing, not in unison. In harmony, 3 voices in that slightly off-scale register building a chord that the porcelain figures had been providing a foundation for all evening. The combined sound was not loud. It was dense. It pressed against the ears not with volume but with presence, the way a room changes when it becomes full of people, not louder, just occupied more completely, the air itself offering a different resistance. The porcelain figure's vibration matched it. The chord and the resonance together filled the chamber so completely that I felt it as pressure in my sinuses, behind my eyes, in the base of my skull, and then all 3 of them turned to look at us. The same eyes. The same open mouth. 3 separate sets of glass eyes. 3 separate tilted faces, oriented at 3 separate points in our group. The song did not pause or change, but something in the quality of it shifted, the patient omnidirectionality of the bass melody narrowing suddenly into something that added direction. A vector. Us. Sophie had her back against the far wall before the rest of us had finished processing what we were seeing. The instinct was right, we followed it. All of us moving back toward the wall, away from the chamber's center, while all 3 Madam Lullabelles tracked us without yet moving. The Madam Lullabelle on Carousel 1 began to dismount. The motion was wrong in every specific detail of how a body dismounts anything. The legs swinging down from the horse, the feet finding the floor, the straightening, each stage technically correct, anatomically recognizable, and yet assembled in the wrong order, the wrong rhythm, the weight distributing itself across the wrong sequence of joints. She found the floor, and she was upright, and she was already closing the distance, and the distance was not closing the way distance closes when something is walking toward you. It was closing the way distance closes in a dream, where the rules of intermediate space do not apply. Carousel 2's Madam Lullabelle was in motion. Carousel 3's was already standing. Sophie had her shoulder against the wall. I watched her push, not because she thought the wall would give, not because she had any reason to believe it would give, but because she had run out of other options, and she was Sophie, and when she ran out of other options, she tried the wall. The wall gave. It did not give from our side. The sound preceded the event by approximately 2 seconds, a deep structural percussion from the direction of the sealed service doors on the far side of the chamber, the ones that had come down as we had barely escaped the disfigured teddy bear flood, not the scratching of the mechanical parts of the teddy bears, which had been continuous and uniform, something singular, something building. The sound of a load-bearing element being tested by a force that has been applying itself to it for hours and has reached the edge of what the element can sustain. The doors failed in a single event. Both panels simultaneously, driven inward from the far side, the reinforced steel that had sealed us into the district hitting the floor of the chamber with an impact I felt in my sternum. And Patchford came through them. Not the Patchford of earlier visits. Not the measured deliberateness, the patient herding, the 20 feet of patchwork bear moving with the careful purpose of something that understood its own scale. This was Patchford after hours of sustained pressure against a sealed door in a facility that was already in a state of rogue, one eye dim and one eye blazing, moving with a momentum that had been building against an obstacle for a long time and had finally run out of obstacle. He came through the collapsed doors and into the chamber without slowing, and the flood came with him. The teddy bears poured through the gap behind him in the same mass formation as the school hallway, but faster. Because the floor of the Carousel District was wide and level, they spread laterally as they entered, filling the chamber from the doors forward, the leading edge cresting and recovering as always. Flowing over any obstacles the district has, the cracking sound of some carousels giving in under the immense pressure of the mechanical plushy flood. The whisper of hundreds of small mechanisms rising to fill the space that the court had occupied a moment before. The chamber became something I do not have a clean word for. Chaos implies a loss of order. What happened in the next 30 seconds was not a loss of order. It was the collision of three separate orders, none of which was compatible with the others, in a space that could not contain all three simultaneously. Patchford's entry clipped the carousel nearest to the doors. Not deliberately, he was not navigating, he was moving, and the carousel was in the path of his movement, and 20 feet of animatronic bear in full momentum is not something a carousel designed in 1963 can absorb. The support structure at the base of the nearest carousel failed on the left side, and the carousel lurched on its axis, and the horses began to detach in sequence as the centripetal load redistributed across a compromised frame. Canopy dropped on one side, the sound of it, metal against metal, the long groan of a joint losing its structural tolerance was enormous even under the cord. The cord fractured. All three of Madam Lullabelle's voices at once, losing the harmony, hitting a dissonance with no resolution, three separate melodies no longer coordinating, each continuing in a different direction from the point of fracture, overlapping into something that was not music and not silence. In the same instant, the porcelain figures nearest to us, three of them within 2 meters on the floor and on an archway bracket and on a booth windowsill, simply stopped holding together, not violently, not with force. They ceased cohering the way ice ceases being ice when the temperature changes, and what remained of them was not debris so much as the residue of a thing that had been maintained by a process that had now been interrupted. The flood was between us and the doors. The flood was between us and the doors. Between us and Patchford, who was now orienting on the Madam Lullabelles, because the Madam Lullabelles were the most immediate mechanical event in his vicinity, and the corruption, whatever it had done to his decision-making, had given him something to respond to that was not us. All three of the Madam Lullabelles had turned from us toward him, and the remains of the cord were reassembling into something directed, not at the group, not anymore, at the 20 feet of patchwork bear that had just destroyed one of her carousels. Sophie's shoulder was still against the wall it gave. It did not fall, it failed at the base, a structural joint that had been holding under the geothermal facility's humidity for 60 years and had been deteriorating in the dark, unnoticed, waiting for a load it could not carry. The additional vibration of the collapsing carousel, combined with the impact tremor of Patchford's entry and the weight of the flood filling the chamber floor, provided that load. The panel dropped outward, away from us, away from the district, into the dark beyond. Not a hole. A full floor-to-ceiling section of wall, dropping away, and behind it a space that was entirely dark. No bioluminescent strips, no carousel light, no ambient anything, just dark and cold air, and the sense of a large space receiving it. "Go," Sophie said. Darius first, then Mina, then me. The fall was further than I expected, 2.5 meters, perhaps 3, enough that the landing required something from my knees that my knees noted with displeasure. The floor was solid concrete, cold and smooth and featureless. I landed and moved immediately because Sophie was coming through above me, and she landed beside me, and for a moment we were both down in the dark with our torches pointing at nothing, just breathing. As I fell I heard, behind me, above me, already receding, the song. One voice, not three. The Madam Lullabelle that had still been oriented on us, tracking us through the final seconds before the wall gave. One voice following us to the edge and no further. Then the wall came back. Not the section we had dropped through. That section had already fallen into the space beneath us. The collapse continued laterally, moving along the wall in both directions from the point of failure, each section dropping in sequence with the sound of a long structural argument reaching its conclusion, until the entire wall of the Carousel District, the full boundary between it and whatever we had fallen into, had come down into the district, sealing the gap from the other side. The carousel sound stopped, the song stopped, the teddy bear flood stopped, Patchford stopped. We were in complete darkness. The silence was so absolute that the sound of our own breathing was startling. Darius switched on his camera light. 3 torches came on within a second of each other. Mina switched on Caleb's torch, and the 4th beam joined the others, and the combined light showed us the floor immediately around us and nothing else. We were in a very large room. This was the first thing the torches told us, and they told us by failing to find any walls. We swept in every direction, floor, concrete, smooth, extending beyond the range of every beam. The ceiling, when Darius pointed the camera upward, was high and industrial, with conduit and ducting running in parallel lines, old infrastructure from a period when this space had served a specific purpose that was not immediately legible. It smelled of cold storage and of nothing having happened here for a very long time. We could not hear the district above us. The collapsed wall had sealed completely. The Carousel District and everything in it, Patchford, the flood, the Madam Lullabelles, the porcelain figures, Caleb's arrow on the 9th chamber wall, was above us and behind a barrier we had not built and could not remove. Caleb was above us. I did not say this aloud. I did not need to. We all knew where the arrow had been pointing, and we all knew that the arrow had been pointing further into the district, and we all knew what that meant now that we were no longer in the district. Nobody said it. We moved instead because moving was the only thing we could do with knowing it. We spread out slightly, Darius and Sophie taking the left arc, Mina and I taking the right, all of us moving slowly enough to keep each other's lights in peripheral view. The floor offered nothing, no seams, no drains, no service hatches, no markings of any kind. Whatever this space had been used for, it had been used for something that required an unbroken surface and left no trace of itself. After 3 minutes of moving, I began to understand the scale of it. The torches were not finding walls because the walls were genuinely distant, not in the way of a large room, but in the way of a space that had been designed to contain something that required significant clearance in every direction. An industrial space, a storage space for something large. "There's nothing here," Mina said. From across the dark, she meant it as an observation, not a conclusion. She was right about the observation. The conclusion was wrong. There was something here. We had not found it yet. My torchlight found the vertical element at the edge of its range. Structural, I thought first, a column, a support pier, something load-bearing. The scale was right for that. But columns do not have shoulders, and this had shoulders, and I moved toward it with the torch lowering as I moved, tracing the shape of it from the top down. Shoulders, and the torn fabric of a formal uniform, operational grey, hanging wrongly, damaged at the right shoulder in a way that suggested sustained directional force. And below that, the formal trouser legs and the feet on the concrete floor. Director Prim, standing with his back to us. Not moving, not oriented toward us at all, simply standing in the absolute dark of an unlit space, facing away in the specific posture of something that has been standing in one place for long enough that it has stopped registering the standing. Not the formal wrongness of his presentation in the assembly hall, the off-frequency voice, the calibrated delivery that sounded like instructions rather than decisions, structurally wrong. He was listing to the left by approximately 10 degrees, and not compensating for it, and the list had the quality of a mechanical failure rather than a choice. Something in his balance system had degraded. I said his name. He turned, not quickly, not with the measured deliberateness of every previous encounter, slowly, as though the instruction to turn had to travel through components that were no longer reliably transmitting it. He turned far enough to look at us over his shoulder, not facing us fully, not completing the rotation, stopping at the point where his head could orient toward us while his body remained mostly forward. In the combined torchlight of 4 beams, we saw his face. The porcelain had cracked. not the fine hairline fracture of Madam Lullabelle, not a single crack carried carefully across decades. These were structural failures, a crack from his right temple to his chin, another across the bridge of his nose, a third running laterally from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Through the cracks, the interior of his face was visible. Actuator rods, relay components, the wiring that ran from his facial mechanisms to the processing unit behind his eyes. One relay cluster behind his left eye had partially displaced. The eye sat slightly wrong in its housing, oriented a few degrees off from the right eye, giving him a gaze that was not quite unified, that looked at two slightly different points simultaneously. He looked at us over his shoulder with the wrong eye and the right eye both, and his expression, through all of it, through every crack and every failure and every degree of displacement, was still recognizably his. The formal courtesy, the considered attention, the particular quality of a mind that processes carefully and communicates precisely, present in the face even when the face was coming apart. He did not speak. His voice, if it was still operational, did not come. He held the look for a long moment, long enough to be deliberate, long enough to be communicating something that was not yet language, and then he turned back to face away from us. He did not move further. He did not gesture. He stood in the dark with his back to us, listing slightly left, in a room with no visible edges, and the torches held on him. And the camera recorded, and none of us spoke because there was nothing yet to say that would not be wrong. The silence of the space held all of us, Prim included perhaps especially, and somewhere above the collapsed wall and the dark and the 60 years of everything that had happened here, Caleb's torch was still on in Mina's hand, and it was the last thing I thought about. I did not say that aloud either.
Come and play in the dark with me. The light's not fair, you all agree. Step outside where the lanterns end. Tag, you're out, little friend. Run and hide in the amber glow, but the dark is where we all must go. I'll find you where the shadows blend. Tag, you're out, little friend. Free. One step past the golden ring. Hear the dark star whispering. Touch your shoulder, touch your hand. Welcome to my fairground land. For don't you like the merry-go-round? Don't you like the carousel sound? Stay and play till the music bends. Tag, you're out, little friend. 5. I've been counting since you came in. Every breath and every spin. The light grows tired, the dark extends. Tag, you're out, little friend. Out is not a frightening word. Out means finally you are heard. Out means I have found you true. Out means I have kept you too. Out is not an ending, dear. Out means you will stay right here, where the carousel never bends, where no one leaves and no one ends. 6, don't you tire of running so? Don't you want to let me know that you are before this song descends? Heck, you're out, little friend. 7, Clara played this game with me. Clara stayed so willingly. Clara knew how the story tends. Heck, you're out, little friend. Final verse. Come and play in the dark with me. The light's not fair, you all agree. Step outside where the lanterns end. Tag, you're out, little friend. Frienders. Come and play in the dark with me. The light's not fair, you all agree. Step outside where the lanterns end. Tag, you're out, little friend. Final verse. Critical failure. Come and play in the dark.
If tonight's story stayed with you, become part of the Pink Collective by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, Pink Collective, stay curious, stay safe, and stay pink.